I'm Amber Peppers, and today I'm going to be talking to you about giraffes and how they manage to maintain regular blood pressure throughout. One of the most awkward looking but most graceful moving creatures in the world is the giraffe. Being the tallest animal in the world at 18 feet with such long necks, giraffes spend a lot of time moving their heads from down low to up high, and so they need a way to keep blood flowing to the brain so they don't get woozy. This means their heart must be extraordinarily equipped to handle the daunting challenges of pumping blood not only to the legs, but also against gravity all the way up to their long necks, to the brain. To understand how the giraffe is able to regulate their blood pressure, first we must understand what homeostasis is and how feedback loops work. Homeostasis is a process in which the body's internal environment is kept stable, despite fluctuations in the external environment. This is achieved by a complex feedback control system, also known as a homeostatic mechanism, which maintains a constant internal environment. There are two types of feedback loops, negative and positive. A negative feedback loop means that whenever a change occurs in the system, it sets off a corrective mechanism which acts to reverse the change until it brings the system back to normal. In contrast, a positive feedback loop is a system in which the results of a change act to increase the perturbation. So what is the purpose of regulating blood pressure? Well, changes in blood pressure are made in order to direct appropriate amounts of oxygen and nutrients to specific parts of the body. For example, in humans, if we are exercising, then more blood is sent to the muscles, or having eaten, more is sent to the gut to aid absorption. When a giraffe stands in its normal upright posture, the blood pressure in the neck arteries will be the highest at the base of the neck and lowest in the head. The blood pressure generated by the heart must be extremely high to pump the blood to the head. This obviously requires a very strong heart. But when the giraffe bends its head to the ground, it encounters a potentially dangerous situation. This will be our disruption. By lowering its head between its front legs, it puts a great strain on its blood vessels in the neck and head. The blood pressure, together with the weight of the blood in the neck, could produce so much pressure in the head that without safeguards, the blood vessels would burst. Luckily, the giraffe has adapted to have such safeguards. This adaptation package includes a coordinated system of blood pressure control, pressure sensors, baroreceptors, along the neck's arteries that monitor the blood pressure and can signal activation of other mechanisms to encounter any increase in pressure as a giraffe drinks or grazes. These sensors signal instructions which will result in contractions of the artery walls, the ability to shunt artery blood flow by passing the brain in a web of small blood vessels between the arteries and the brain, the retin-measurable. All these mechanisms control the blood pressure in the giraffe's head, as well as making sure the lower body does not pool with blood. The giraffe's adaptations do not occur in isolation, but presuppose other adaptations that must all be coordinated into a single, highly specialized organism. Unfortunately, this is only the short version of what occurs. In reality, the giraffe's blood pressure regulation is far more elaborate. We can put this system into the feedback loop discussed earlier. This allows us to see the system more clearly. In contents of the giraffe, blood pressure regulation is a negative feedback loop, as a change in the blood pressure will be brought back to normal. The feedback loop has 5 different parts, as you can see in the slide. I'll briefly go over each stage and then go more in depth throughout my presentation. The first stage of this feedback loop is known as the input, which is the stimulus that sets off the whole process. This will be an increase or decrease in the blood pressure of a giraffe. The next stage, which is activated by the stimulus, is the receptor, which receives the information that a change has occurred in the blood pressure. In the giraffe's case, this is the baroreceptors located in the blood vessels. These receptors will then activate the controller, which coordinates the information, if more than one receptor is involved, and sends instructions off. Our controller in the giraffe's case will be the medulla oblongata, as they control the information being sent off to either decrease or increase the blood pressure. The next stage is the effector, which receives the signals from the controller and causes action that allows change. In the giraffe's case, there is vasodilation of blood vessels and the jugular vein, which helps to furthermore prevent blood rushing quickly back down to the neck. The giraffe's heart will be instructed to increase the pressure, and then finally we have the output, which is the result of the effector action. This means if the blood pressure in the giraffes had increased to start with, hopefully we'll see a decrease as a result of the change. Therefore, the output then affects the input and homeostasis is restored. If we see a decrease in the giraffe's blood pressure shown in this feedback loop, then we'll see the opposite of what occurred in the previous feedback loop, as the system is now trying to increase the blood pressure to change the input. So hopefully we'll see an increase in the output, which will therefore affect our input. Our effectors will look slightly different to the previous feedback loop, as now the pressure has decreased, so vasoconstriction must occur. The jugular vein will act as a blood reservoir, which was further helped by muscle fibers surrounding it and leading up to the heart. Let's look at our receptors again. In my case, the giraffe's receptors are baroreceptors, which are located in the blood vessels. They are a type of mechanoreceptor sensory neuron that gets excited by the stretching of blood vessels. They can divide into two categories based on the type of blood vessels they are located in: high-pressure arterial baroreceptors and low-pressure baroreceptors. Therefore, if there is an increase in the blood pressure, this will trigger increased action potentials and provides information to the central nervous system, going to the medulla oblongata. Baroreceptors act immediately as part of a negative feedback system called the baroreflex. As soon as there is a change, they return back to a normal level. These receptors detect changes in the pressure throughout the circulatory system and then translate those changes into electrochemical signals sent to the nucleus tractus solitans and the medulla oblongata via the nervous system. The medulla oblongata is therefore our controller, which coordinates the information sent from the baroreceptors and then sends out instructions for maintaining a constant blood pressure. They do this by automatically responding to the stretching or contractions that occur to the artery wall. Inside the vein, there are valves that control the pressure by balancing the intense blood flow. An important system is vasoconstriction and vasodilation, which is the reduction and increase of the diameter of lumen of arterioles. Vasodilation will increase the diameter of the lumen of the arterioles. The flow of blood is increased due to a decrease in vascular resistance. Therefore, dilation of arterial blood vessels will decrease the blood pressure. This is particularly helpful when a disruption such as a giraffe lowering its head occurs, as it prevents pooling of blood in the legs and lower body. Likewise, when a giraffe raises its head, vasoconstriction occurs to decrease the diameter of the lumen. When blood vessels constrict, the flow of blood is restricted or decreased. The blood pressure therefore increases. This occurs in the limbs to prevent pooling of blood. The legs and feet that are below the heart also have extra protection. The skin on the legs and feet of the giraffe is so thick it protects it from negative effects of the blood pressure. This disruption of moving the head is maintained well in the lower part of the body, but what must occur along the neck to ensure that blood can firstly reach the head and secondly does not go rushing to the head as a giraffe lowers it. The disruption of raising and lowering the head can be put in a feedback loop to make things easier to understand. As you can see, compared to the original feedback loop at the start of the video, this feedback loop has many more effectors as the giraffe's body has evolved to take extra precautions due to the major risks caused by the giraffe's extremely long necks. Some of these effectors are also used in the normal blood pressure regulation. Now I will go on to explain this disruption a little better and go more in depth into the system. Blood pressure depends on the capacity of the cardiovascular system, as well as the efficiency of the pump. Giraffes have found a way of adjusting the capacity of the cardiovascular system and are able to shrink and expand their blood vessels to change the volume. They are able to do this very efficiently. The cardiovascular system has to adjust to maintain blood flow. This is accomplished by a U system formed by the jugular veins, climbing up and climbing down. A series of one-way valves in their neck keeps the blood moving upwards against the gravitational pressure. The blood veins that flow in the opposite direction zeros the total pressure that could lead to hemorrhages. As you can see in the diagram on my PowerPoint, that the giraffe's jugular veins help control the blood pressure as it bends down. The jugular vein acts as a blood reservoir and is elastic so that it can stretch, counteracting the force of gravity on blood. It is further helped by muscle fibers surrounding it, leading to the heart, which slows the flow of blood when the head is raised. As blood comes down, there is a little spigot-like valves that close. These are in the artery that goes up the neck. When the giraffe's head is down, there is also a sponge under the brain, and it gently expands to protect the brain so it doesn't blow out. Now the giraffe must quickly raise its head. As he does this, those valves reopen and the sponge under the brain gently squeezes that last pump of oxygenated blood up to his brain. So if the blood pressure can be controlled when the giraffe bends down, then how does the giraffe cope with pumping blood to the head, which is 2 meters away? This creates two problems for the giraffe's heart. One, it must be able to get blood up 2 meters high, and secondly, it must be able to cope with the hydrostatic pressure exerted on it by the amount of blood in such a tall neck. Their heart must beat strongly enough to overcome significant downward pressure caused by gravity. The heart is approximately 61 centimeters long and weighs 11 kgs and can pump 60 to 75 litres of blood per minute. That's a very strong heart. But in fact, giraffes actually have quite a small heart in comparison to their size. The difference between their heart and other animals' hearts is that they have extremely thick walls. This makes their heart small but extremely powerful in delivering blood pressure. Giraffes still have high blood pressure, but they have adapted to the high blood pressure so they do not suffer as a consequence. The same high blood pressure, known as hypertension, will kill the average human being, but in giraffes they have evolved to tolerate the high blood pressure even at birth. The giraffe's heart has evolved to have thick muscle walls and a small radius, giving it great power. The walls of the blood vessels thicken as the giraffe gets older. As the neck grows longer, this helps to avoid rupturing under the increase in pressure. The blood pressure reaches the brain from the heart by way of common and external carotid arteries. The two external carotids divide just before each reaches the brain into many small vessels, forming a tight network that is called the rete meariable. The vessels of the giraffe rete have elastic walls which can accommodate excess blood when the head is lowered so that the brain is not flooded. As a further safeguard for the brain, while the giraffe is in this position, a connection between the carotid artery and the vertebral artery drains off a proportion of the blood even before it reaches this network. The walls of the rete meariable vessels are also elastic enough to retain sufficient blood when the head is raised so that the brain supply is not depleted momentarily during the system's pressure changes. Another disruption is when giraffes experience extreme stress. This can affect the heart, which affects the blood pressure. Experiencing a tremendous amount of shock and stress causes the cardiovascular system to collapse, as it interrupts the usual blood flow and pressure in and out of the heart. This is rare in wild giraffes, but in many captive giraffes this is all too common, as they can experience it due to bad keeping pens or being moved from place to place. Unfortunately, when giraffes do experience such extreme shock, they will usually die. So what is the adaptive significance for the giraffe? It is extremely important because without the efficient system, the giraffe would struggle to lower its head to drink water. Their blood could quickly go rushing to their heads and very easily rupture their blood vessels. This allows them to be able to quickly get away from predators if they are nearby, instead of having to worry about their blood vessels bursting. Without the system, giraffes could easily develop hypertension, high blood pressure, which they would die from if left. Another adaptive significance is that without the strong heart, the blood would not be able to reach the brain. This high blood pressure pumped by the heart means that oxygen and nutrients are able to reach the brain. Without the blood pressure mechanism, the giraffe's pressure could easily drop when climbing the 2-meter distance, and therefore the giraffe wouldn't get oxygen to the brain, and so would die. Luckily, this isn't the case, and the giraffe has a system that is able to respond to these changes. Another equally helpful adaptation is that all the arteries and veins in the giraffe's legs are very internal. The capillaries that reach the surface are extremely small. Their red blood cells are surprisingly 1/3 smaller than humans, making capillary passage possible. These unique facets of the giraffe are all interactive and interdependent with its long neck. The smaller red blood cells allow for more surface area and a higher and faster absorption of oxygen into the blood. This is significant as it helps to retain adequate oxygen to all extremities, including the head. And that now brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks for watching.